welcome everyone to another table talk. And today we have Imre from Holass. You had his Kek Frankos called Balf in your case. I don't know how many of you how many of you are tasting it today with us today? Okay, brilliant. A few of you, excellent. Well, we join you in that. That's great.
Drank it already, I'm afraid.
Well, there is some more, so and some others we'll be telling you about. Imre and his partner Ellie set up Holass. They're a couple. So Ellie is looking after the kids this evening while Imre talks to you about the wine. So we just have Imre with us this evening. Their project is it's quite an unusual one. It's maybe not what you might typically think of when you think of winemakers or a winery, where you perhaps think of people who have vineyards and they have a property. Maybe it's been in the family for several generations. But Holass is really, I suppose we quite often describe it as a sort of a modern winemaking project. So they don't own their own vineyards. They partner with like-minded producers and wineries across Austria and Hungary, and they don't have a cellar either. They make their wines in the cellars of the people they partner with for the vineyards. So it's quite a different approach, which Imre will explain to you shortly. So Imre, perhaps you can kick off by telling us a little, introducing yourself, and tell us a little bit about how Holass came about.
Sure. Well, hello everybody. My name is Imre Holass. I'm from Hungary originally, and Holass as a project, as a label, came to life back in 2016. Well, that was the first release. Eventually, it was in 2015 when I started to date with my, well, back then girlfriend, my wife, Ellie, who's from Belgium. She's been a wine distributor in Belgium for fine wines, and she happened to distribute one of those labels for which I worked in Burgundy for. We met at a trade fair, we fell in love, started to date. And during these trips to Hungary of hers, we came across an abandoned vineyard, of which we managed to agree the owner with to take the grapes if we work the vineyard. And that marked the birth of our first ever label. That was the Holass Sümeg. This is a white and red field blend from the Balaton uplands. And this is something we brought to the market in 2016 in Belgium, where my girlfriend lives, where eventually we spent most of our time at that time, once I left Austria. And it started all as a hobby. So basically we thought, hey, we have 1,000 bottles of wine and we're just going to sell it to the friends and family. But eventually, roughly about 10 Michelin star restaurants joined immediately to buy the first or pilots Holass label. And after that, the word was spread, and some of my friends and old colleagues started to call me if we would be interested to maybe to do something with them together. And that gave us an idea. I mean, I've been a long-standing fan of Mikkeller beer, which brewed in a similar fashion around the world, and Equipo Navassos, the sherry brand, which has been kind of a similar, collecting under the same label, like different origins and different ideas of wine. So we thought, okay, why don't we do that to my home country, where I'm coming from, where I know the culture, of which I know the background of, have all these connections, and it's kind of organically grew. So year after year, another grower joined, and by then we are working with 5 different growers in 6 different regions, from Tokai till Burgenland. So Burgenland technically is a part of Austria, but it's been the part of the Hungarian kingdom up until the First World War. So I provided a couple of maps. Yes, brilliant. So here you see Austria and Hungary on the same map, which is brilliant, because normally you hardly ever find that. You either find a Hungarian map or an Austrian map without the other one. So this is the world we're living in. It's hard to see regions. And there I circled around all the different regions where we're working. So up there on the right up corner, you see Tokaj against the Slovakian border. So that's roughly about 400, 450 kilometers to the west of Hungary. And this is a place where I'm coming from. My connection to Tokaj is my mom is coming from that area. My father is coming from the Balaton area. So obviously we're working in the Balaton area with my father on the Somló Hill and the Balaton uplands. And I did most of my professional career in Burgenland, in the Sopron region. So in Burgenland, you see we work up in the north, so on the west bank of the Neusiedlersee, on the Leitergebirge. Then in the Sopron area, which is technically, well, it used to be the capital of Burgenland. Today it's a part of Hungary. That's during this whole treaty period of the Trianon Treaty, that somehow they managed to keep it in Hungary and put the rest of Burgenland into Austria. And then in the south of Burgenland, you see the last circle in that sort of purple bed. So these are the 6 different origins. And yeah, you may ask how do we make sort of a coherent winemaking style out of all these different origins and grapes. This is basically the idea that we want to show what this area of Hungarian winemaking is about. We were looking for traditionally and historically the best regions like Tokaj and the Balaton and Somló and Burgenland. And we had to have a connection to it, either a familiar connection, either previous work experience, either very good friends, where we can work together with people who are exact on the same length like we are. So eventually, we don't own any vineyards, we don't have a cellar, which would be impossible to basically to support so many different excise depots in Hungary and Austria, and cellars and vineyard work. But we do it through a mutual agreement that each and every winery of ours we are working with, they work a single plot for us, a single vineyard. And that single vineyard every year is produced for our labels. So we take the grapes and the wine is developed with my input. So that's how we created this sort of 6 to 8 labels, what Holass is today is about, and spread across from the northeast of Hungary till Burgenland. So this is basically in a nutshell what we do. I don't know if it might be a little bit confusing, so please feel free to ask for need any.
Yeah, what I didn't say, of course, is if you have any questions as you go along, please pop them in the chat, and I'll sort of try to weave them in as we go along, or we'll pick them up at the end. And of course, as always, we'll pick up on any questions at the end as well. So.
But if I may expand a little bit on, like, to me, this way to work, to be able to work with all these different regions, it's such a huge advantage. So before I worked for a single winery in a single region, you are always somewhat put up with sort of, you're confined to a place, you know, you're confined to very often, you know, to the local traditions, not always in the right way, or to the climate, or what's possible there. So we have a bit of this. I mean, it's maybe a little bit wrong to say, but idea of cherry picking some of the best terroirs and best grapes from around this wine region, and it gives us a huge freedom. So we were able to develop a label, Holass. This is the phonetic writing of my family name, and that's something, by the way, my wife came up with. So we did not pay an expensive marketing office. One night in front of her laptop, she was making business cards for me at that time, and I left Austria, and I was looking for further options, and suddenly we had our first label without the wine. Once we had a first bottle of wine, we just put the business card on the wine, and that's how the Holass label came along. Which is pretty funny, because back then in Austria, friends of mine used to ask me, like, Imre, why don't you make your own wine yet? And I said, like, well, my ego is big enough without putting my name on a label. Here we go, like 5 years later, suddenly my name is on the label and being spread around the world. So here we are.
I suppose it's the phonetic spelling of your name rather than the actual. So maybe it's not everyone gets that.
Exactly. That's why we put it into that sort of phonetic brackets. So, and this is like, yeah, I can put it into the second meaning of it, that my Hungarian name, which is difficult to pronounce in the West, is the same way my Hungarian origin, these wines of my Hungarian origin, are translated or explained to the West. So being brought on the market in a fashion and in a style and in a quality which makes sense, which is not just another cheap Eastern European wine or something really obscure, but something which is rightfully among the best wines of the world. Sorry, by the way, is the rest of the family just popped in?
We just came to say hi.
Oh, hello.
Hi. I'm quite occupied with the baby, so I let Imi do the.
This is the next generation of Holass.
Yes. We wanted to bear your babies in the meantime. I hope you enjoy the talk.
Thank you for popping in.
Bye.
Sorry, as you can see, it remains a family company. Even if we do all this very clever thing, working with all the different finance, you don't have to expect a big financial mogul behind us and be sitting somewhere in an ivory tower and making this big machination. It remains a fun project. So yeah,
Imre, Phil is asking how do you find the specific vineyards that you work with? You said that the people you work with are people you come across with similar philosophies, but how do you sort of home in on particular plots that you work with? So
the very reason why you see where the Holass origins are coming from, it's places with I'm absolutely familiar with. So through my mom's connection from the Northeast, from Tokaj, these are vineyards and places I know from my childhood. And back then in around 2005-07, when the first dry Tokajs came out, some of those guys who were pioneers of these young winemakers, they were very close to my father. I experienced this whole progress, so I was able to follow this thing. Obviously in the Balaton region, that's where my father is coming from. So this is where we spent, our childhood, in many ways visiting family members who had vineyards. So that applies to the Somló Hill and to the Balaton upland region where we work with the Sümeg. And Burgenland is obviously, well, I was born in the western part of the country in Szombathely, which is just right in the middle of this Burgenland bit. And when I returned from South Africa after a short stint in the Swartland to eventually work for a famous Burgenland winemaker, that's where I got really, all these people I'm working with in Burgenland, these are my contemporary, my friends, my contemporary people. Mm-hmm. We mostly spent a lot of dinners and drunken nights together and kept going to each other's cellar to taste and see each other's vineyards. So all what you see in Holass, it has been building in the past sort of, I would say, 15, almost 20 years. So some of the people I'm a Franz Weniger, I know since I was 15. Because obviously my father was a wine lover, his father was a winemaker, and we met at the same wine club when we were 15. Instead of going to the pub, we went to taste the wines together. So that's how I grew, and so I know very well their vineyards, what is possible. Of course, it's we're not just walking in and we say like, okay, we want to do so, then we want to do this and this and that. It's more of a nice mutual agreement. What do you think? How can we add to what you are already doing, what you are not able to do with your labels? Very often, not every winemaker can release like 10 different single vineyards. That's about the top. So for them, it's also a fantastic opportunity to be able to follow the life and the development of a certain single vineyard through our input.
And how influenced are you? Is your winemaking quite consistent wherever you make your wine, or do you find yourself quite influenced by the person whose winery you're working in?
Well, the thing is that our winemaking is It's very simple. So basically, we follow the same traditional, authentic techniques as always been. So we neither do enology or trends or extreme novelties of trying out different stuff or what is trendy or fashionable now. We just do things how things have always been done. I mean, well, pretty much before the 70s, because in the 70s you get industrialism sneaking in, and then in the 80s, 90s we started to follow international trends. But before that, so eventually it's all about to put that origin into the glass, which is kind of a cliche to say, but as long as you work very pure and very focused, and you don't let yourself influenced by any sort of trend, it's pretty much the same idea. So we do follow the same idea, but still, the way I select those vineyards, what we want to work with, and the final touch is when we decide like rather to use a 3,000 liter barrel, as is in the case of the Holass valve, or only 500s, or only stainless steel, or only fiberglass. That's finally, this is my call to make. And the same for the harvest, and the same for, I mean, the vineyard work is in all cases perfect, because we're looking for healthy grapes. So everybody works at least organic, whether or not certified. Some of them, they work without a tractor in the vineyard on permaculture. Other guys do biodynamic. So this is just, I'm just trying to explain that we are coming from all different directions, but coming to the same goal. Mm-hmm. And then the same goal, if you taste all the Holass wines next to each other, there's a certain idea behind the wine. So you can see that sort of purity and the style. So to me, it's very important that we don't just go and shop some wine around, put our label on it, and put a nice story behind it and sell it. I mean, it has to make sense. So this is the only way to develop with this. When we go and let these wines taste the top sommeliers around France and Belgium, what we do ourselves here is when they taste the wines next to each other, suddenly, you know, the experience of tasting one wine helps the other one, because then they see that they all come out from the same direction, and they know where they are heading to. So that's how you give weight, I believe, to the place, to your own brand, to what you want to achieve with your brand in combination with the place.
And actually that leads on really well to a question. Phil was asking if you can give a sense of the different terroirs or climates that you work in for these different wines. I mean,
sure. I mean, do you have time till about midnight? Or I can do that very well. But
well, let's start with the Balf and then move round.
It's a lot. So we start with the Balf, talking which, I mean, Balf is coming from the southwestern bank of the Noordzee, the Vertutu. I mean, this is a lake which is divided by the border, and this is on the Hungarian side. So there we're sitting like in a southeastern exposure, directly to the lake, and this is pure mica schist and gneiss. There's no cover, so I put like a shabby little red dot there and Sopron it around Sopron. So in this region we have this sort of very warm Pannonian warm air, dry air, warm summer climate, a lot of exposure from the sea, pure rocky soil, old wines. We go further south. I mean, it's very funny when I explain that the Pinka, for example, another wine of ours, comes from the south of Burgundy, and everybody expects that must be really warm because, you know, when we talk about north and south, especially in England, I suppose that you have different ideas how the north and the south operates. But for example, the south of Burgundy, for some reason, is much cooler because it's more trapped by the Alps. Somehow it takes a turn there where you have more of this cool air climate. So. And there again, we have a different kind of soil. We have iron-rich loam there, for example. On the north of Burgenland, it's a little bit similar to what we have in Sopron, but there the vines are sitting on calcaire, on muschelkalk, on a sea sedimentation. In Tokai, we have volcanic soil, which is rhyolite. That's a typical volcanic soil of Tokai. And of course, with an extra sedimentation of the ancient Pannonian Sea. Then we go to the Balaton uplands, where our Schumeg wine is coming from a vineyard where we have pure limestone and silex and nothing else. I mean, it's a pure soil. There's no sand, there's no loam. And in 50-50, you have limestone and silex mixed on the soil, which is crazy as far as I'm concerned. And then we go to the Chomlo, which is pure basalt. That's an extinct volcano, and we're growing on pure basalt. So yeah, we have 6 origins, and I told you 6 different soil types. And of course, Tokai is very, very marginal by temperature fluctuation up there. It can get really, really cold and very warm. In the Balaton uplands, this is more of a sub-Mediterranean climate, including Chomlo. In the Burgenland, of course, you have a lot of the combination from the alpine cold, wet wind, which comes from the mountains, and the warm, dry air from the Pannonian. So, well, basically, if you ask this question serious, and if I want to give you a serious answer, we can really talk about it for hours. I can break it down to it. And that's super exciting about it. To me, this is a great deal to be able to have for one more important thing for Holass is always local grapes. So we always work with autochtone local grapes.
Phil, does that answer your question about terroir? Is there anything more that you want to know about terroir?
I was just trying to get thank you. I was just trying to get a sense of it, because obviously, you know, it is stretched right across, you know, from the Austro-Hungarian border right across to across the top. So I was just trying to get a sense of how, I guess, Mediterranean it was versus how alpine it was, and, you know, just in terms of the weather and the climate, and then trying to match that to what the soil was doing as you go from the western side to the eastern side across the map you've shown there.
Yes. I mean, it's a very good question, because it's an extremely diverse region. I mean, even if there's 450 kilometers between Tokai and Burgenland, at the end of the day, this entire Carpathian Basin, so everything what you find within the Carpathian Mountains, you know, on the top, in the north of Slovakia, and going down all the way to Romania, and on the south, it's divided by the Balkan Mountains, and then in Austria with the Alps, within there is a basin. So, and this huge basin, it just creates those, there was a geologic activity within, which is countless. I mean, even within Sopron, there's a hill where you find volcanic stone, where you find calcaire, where you find schist, where you find loam, where you find loess, on the same hill, on different exposures. So it really is a great patchwork and very exciting. So, but there's no such thing as, you know, I think in many ways in France, it's a little bit more divided. I mean, you know that in Châteauneuf, you have the galets, you know that in the Loire, you have the schist, and you have the gneiss and the schist and the calcaire. So, but here it's extremely diverse, even within the same region. It's probably the most homogeneous region is Tokai, because the whole Tokai development is about this sort of 20 million year old volcanic activity of rhyolite andesite, and that's all volcanic. But the rest is all different. But what is very important, even if there's so many differences between the subsoil, the nature of this basin, I mean, 5 million years ago, this area was covered by the Pannonian Sea. And the Pannonian Sea was the part of the Mediterranean Sea, but 10 million years ago, and then 5 million years ago, it dried up around where Croatia and Slovenia is today. So that passage dried up, and within the basin, the sea just turned into a sweetwater sea. And the sedimentation of this sweetwater sea, which covers pretty much everything which is not on the, you know, which is not on the eroded hillside. So on the lower part of the hill and all around Hungary, there's always, to some extent, the sedimentation of the Pannonian Sea. And this is sort of a sandy, loamy soil with a great deal of calcareous content. But it's not the same calcaire what you see in Chablis, or, you know, it's not this sort of bright white calcaire. It's more, you know, the broken down sweetwater fauna of the ancient sea. And that gives kind of a unique passport to all these wines, to all. That's why, I mean, we are actually working on a new term, because a lot of people, I mean, do we talk about Hungary? It's a very problematic historical part of the world. I mean, you cannot really point out whether these are Hungarian wines. If not Hungarian, why not Slovakian? So we're working on a new term, and we just want to call this whole thing the wines of the Carpathian Basin, because that just makes sense. Everything within the Carpathian Basin, what comes from there, eventually they will have some of the same, I think, the same DNA in a way, what they gain from this same origin. And yeah,
do you think Do you think the Blaufränkisch or Kekfrankos, as it's known in Hungary, do you think that's pretty well suited to this area, all the soils?
Well, obviously, I mean, that's the point. So the Kekfrankos and the Blaufränkisch, I mean, now you're tasting Balf. Balf is a village in the Sopron region. Sopron, formerly known as Ödenburg, that was the capital of Burgenland. Of course, strictly German speaking, but after the World War became part of Hungary. It's a long story. But eventually, this is the area where the first time Blaufränkisch was mentioned. So through the Napoleonic Wars, the soldiers of Napoleon, they were buying the wine from the locals and they were paying with the blue franc. So their money, which was blue, and that was the franc, the money of Napoleon's soldiers. And that's where the variety got its name from, that they were paying with the blue franc. So that's Blaufränkisch, and in Hungarian, Kekfrankos, which is literally translated blue franc.
Oh, well, I have never heard that story. That's fascinating. Thank you.
That's what the Holass do. But so Sopron is the origin of Kekfrankos. That's what I wanted to explain. So this is where the first time we heard about the variety, this is really the genesis of the place. And obviously something which develops over hundreds of years throughout centuries and remains and becomes the best variety. I believe obviously this is the variety which is the best for the region. I mean, it's the same, like it's very typical in all the old world wine regions, you know. In the new world, of course, everything can be planted as you wish. But in the old world, we know where the Riesling comes from. We know where the Chardonnay comes from normally. We know where the Pinot Noir comes from, or the Nebbiolo. So same thing, Kekfrankos is at home in this Carpathian basin. And its very origin, as far as we know, is Sopron. Where this wine is coming from the Sopron wine region.
Yeah, because I haven't seen Blaufränkisch planted in California or
there's a little bit.
or Australia or anything. A little bit, yeah.
As well. There's
really?
Weirdos, they do that, you know. It's like you got those guys like Arnaud Roberts, and I'm not sure if they did Blaufränkisch, but the kinds, you know, like they do a little bit. But you're right, this has never became the Cabernet Sauvignon of the world. It remains sort of an obscure variety. It's planted in Germany, somewhat in the south, and for some reason they call it Lemberger, but the Germans, they call everything differently. So that's up to them. Only Riesling. That's the only thing which matches with the rest. But no, Blaufränkisch is really to this region. So that's a very strong connection, and I think it's a very strong story we have to tell. So instead of working with Pinot Noir, which, I mean, you can make beautiful Pinot Noir in this area, but it will never be Blaufränkisch. It will never have the same DNA. It will never have the same message like this wine do. If you have time for it, there's one connection I would like to talk about. And it's been something talked about, that whether or not Gamay Noir is whether or not Blaufränkisch is the descendant of Gamay Noir or the way around. Now they figured it out that actually it was the way around. So Gamay Noir is descended from Blaufränkisch. It's not to say that Blaufränkisch is the father of Gamay Noir, but they are related. And probably Blaufränkisch was first. And that brings me to the point that I love Cru Beaujolais. I love the way like really good Cru Beaujolais tastes, you know, from the big old guys of Foillard, of Lapierre, of Metras. And this is something which I think in many ways in the 80s and 90s, they misinterpreted Blaufränkisch in a way. Of course, that was the state of the art, doing Super Toscane, Bordeaux style wines, heavily oaked, heavily extracted, very often adding some Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon to it. And then after, in the years of 2000, they tried to turn it into a really chic, super expensive wine which can challenge, you know, Burgundy Grand Crus or the best Nebbiolos, which was always a little bit of an underdog position. And eventually, my point in this, where I came into this story with Blaufränkisch, that I would just love to see Blaufränkisch as it is, as it is related to Gamay Noir and the wines I love from Beaujolais, wines which are available, wines which are great fun, yet serious. I think Blaufränkisch should be, and it doesn't mean that we are working carbonic or anything. It's just that sort of somewhat, I think, believed connection between the two grapes. So for me, this is more of the stylistic direction to go, but not a technical one. it's more what the grape gives us if we leave it alone, if we don't, if we don't force ourselves on it to tell it what to do and push it into a direction. And I believe, when you taste this wine, it's very often when people taste it blind, and you do get somewhat a little bit of that idea.
Yeah, it's very sort of fresh and mineral. I'd hate to put too much new oak on it. It would be such a shame.
This wine has been elevated in a 3,000 liter wooden fermentation vat, which is about 20 years old. So it's as little oak as possible.
Phil's just asking if Blaufränkisch could become better known, and what's the barrier? I think maybe the pronunciation, possibly. As always. It's not the most difficult grape to pronounce, but
Look, that's very common, of course. Well, the barrier, of course, pronunciation as well, and culture. So see what happened. We had the Second and the First World War, where Austria and Hungary were standing on the wrong side. I cannot put it any nicer, but completely on the wrong side. And eventually, the biggest Blaufränkisch plantations, cake Frankish, are coming from Hungary. In Hungary, Blaufränkisch is the most widely planted red grape. But then, even after we overcame the whole horror of Second World War, came the Iron Curtain to Hungary. So we were completely, culturally, we forgot about this region. So once you even in Austria, it's brilliant when you talk to Austrians, they don't really consider Blaufränkisch and Burgenland as part of their heritage, because it has not been. So it very often it's just kind of the weird sort of poor nephew or niece, who it's in the family, but maybe we should not talk about it. And I think it's a huge barrier in many ways. But on the other hand, I'm not 100% sure if Blaufränkisch must become the best known varietal in the world. Just look at what's happening in the Jura, one of the smallest wine regions in whole of France, with obscure little varieties, and everybody knows it around the world, but it doesn't mean that it would be planted all around and it would be overhyped. It really is for those people who learn that I love this kind of wines and they handle it in the right place. That's all we want. We don't want world domination of Blaufränkisch.
Happy to be doing it well in the region you're in.
Yes.
Should we talk just briefly about some of the other wines that you produce? Maybe just starting with the difference between the Balf and the Sopron, which are both Blaufränkisch, and they're planted very close together, but are quite different wines.
They are about 500 meters apart. So they're literally sitting on the same slope. So Sopron, this is coming from a vineyard site called the Holass Wines, which is on the top of the hill, and there is a more heavy loamy soil. This one is more on the eroded part and sitting on a pure rock. And it's the same viticulture, it's the same idea of harvest, it's the same grape. It comes from the same vintage. But of course, Sopron comes a little bit more youthful, a little bit more primaire, a little bit more fruity along. Like Balf is more of the spicy, more of the maybe with a little bit more tension, a little bit more of the geeky wine of them. But that really explains as well how Blaufränkisch works. You put it 500 meters apart, just like in Burgundy, the soil changes a little bit, the wind blows from different direction and you get a different wine out of it. So that's very exciting. So this is a little bit the red bit, what you don't have now, and this is something we skipped the vintage with Ritzing, which comes from the other side of the border. So it's also on the Sopron hill, but that happens to be in Austria. And there's a village called Ritzing, and there we make Blaufränkisch from pure calcaire, which is super exciting. This is a wine which we will see coming back from September on, the new vintage, the 2019. So those are the 3 red wines we make, and the red wines are only Blaufränkisch or cake Frankish, depends on which side of the border they're coming from. And then we do the 2 whites in Burgenland, one on the north, which is 100% Grüne Veltliner. That's a Burger. That's coming from limestone. And one on the south, which is 100% Holass Riesling, which is Welsh Riesling in Austria, and that comes from iron-rich clay and green schist soil from the south of Burgenland. And then in the Shomlo area, we do a classic Shomlo field blend. Shomlo is an extinct volcano in the middle of the south, in the middle of the West Transdanubia. This is a unique place. It's a fantastic place. There's a vineyard, an old vineyard co-planted with 10 different varieties, and we just pick it together and press it and make a very, very straightforward special wine out of it. The same way we work in the Balaton uplands. There's our rosé. Well, it's not a rosé, it's a field blend. So this is where we started. This is the vineyard with the silex and the limestone. And there we grow Cake Francois and Holass Riesling in the same vineyard together. Not that we knew about it, but when we took over this abandoned vineyard, once the color change happened, we realized that half of the vineyard was white and the other one red. So we just everything stick the whole thing together, press it together, and that's, well, I mean, you call it rosé, you call it pink colored white wine, you call it pink colored red wine, I don't care. It's just a direct press. And then in Tokai, we do a dry Tokai, which is predominantly ferment and some hash level in 500-liter barrels, more in this really classic, elegant Burgundy style. I don't know, not really. I mean, something, if you like Chenin Blanc from the Loire, if you like nice dry Riesling from Germany, I mean bone dry Riesling, and if you like good Burgundy, I put in between this triangle somewhere in the middle, the dry ferment from Tokai. So that would be the style. So these are a little bit the wines we produce. As you understood, they mostly refer to native local grapes or a field blend. So in the Balaton Shomlo area, we only work with field blends because that's the tradition there. Those are vineyards, like small scale vineyards. There we work with, like 2,000 square meter and 3,000 square meter. Those are the two vineyards we have. Those are our two smallest batches. And that's the tradition there, like small vineyards, co-planted, small format of winemaking. While in Austria, in the Burgenland region and in Sopron region, the more traditional classic regions, you have more of the fully Grüne Veltliner or Welsh Riesling or Cake Francois planted or Blaufränkisch planted vineyards. And the same in Tokai, which is always ferment with some hash level in the field blend.
You don't see quite so much Grüne in Burgenland. Why do you think that is?
Well, I'm really glad you brought this up, and I'm not going to talk too much about it, but Grüne Veltliner was the most widely planted white grape variety of Burgenland. I think it still is, maybe. I'm not 100% sure. You can look up the facts. And there is one more thing to it. I mean, we all think of Burgenland as a red wine producing region because of all the swagger coming out of and the fame of Blaufränkisch, but it was mostly white wine producing. Very similarly to the Loire, as well as Burgundy is Cabernet Franc today, and before that there was a lot of Chenin as well. So Burgenland has been white wine producing region. Grüne Veltliner still is one of the most important white grapes of it. And here comes the best bit. Grüne Veltliner originates from the Leitagebirge, from Burgenland. So we all know Grüne Veltliner, and I'll tell you why. Because there is taxpayers, millions of euros went into the Austrian wine marketing board. Please don't tell anybody, I hope nobody's sitting here, into the support of Grüne Veltliner around the world. The big groovy boom in the USA was all very heavily subsidized by the Austrian wine marketing board. Now, here comes the bit. From the Niederösterreich, from the Wachau, Wagram, Kremstal area, came all the guys who were sitting in the board. The guys who made this kind of draft to make Grüne Veltliner great and world famous and known. And everybody forget about it, that actually it was at home in Burgenland on the first place. The Urrebe, the first vine, what they consider as like the oldest Grüne Veltliner wine stock, it's situated on the Leitagebirge in Burgenland, about 20 kilometers away where we make our Burgenland from. And that's why we call Holass Burgenland, because it's the Burgenland white. This is our sort of message that the Burgenland white is a Grüne Veltliner, like a Bourgogne Blanc is a Chardonnay. And
I wondered about that because I always think of it as from further north in Austria. So
yeah, I mean, of course, now it's famous there and very widely planted, and now it really is the majority there. But this is a bit of a history which is again forgotten because of that sort of semi-situation of Burgenland. I know. I remember going to Wachau and talking to the guy there, FX Spiegler and Hitzbergen, and then they all told us about the great stories, and they know nothing about Burgenland. When I talked to them, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't want to use anybody, but it's kind of sort of a bit of a forgotten corner, you know. I don't know what to compare it to in terms of the UK, but maybe the Southwest. I don't know. You know, the place where it takes hours to get to, or I don't know. But anyway, so that's the story of Burgenland and Veltliner.
Okay, cool. Phil was wondering if there are challenges to working in lots of different wineries. I mean, I guess you're harvesting it maybe sort of at the same time, but having to be in different places or not?
Well, the good thing about it, it's going back to Phil's question about the terroir and the different places. Thankfully, it's very nicely spread. So, I mean, I'm not saying that I have months to play with, but it's very rare that we run into overlaps. So all the different varieties and all the different regions, we are able to fit it quite nicely in. And from the Somló-Balaton, the south of Burgenland is about an hour away, it's not too crazy. And that's also Holass Riesling, which is a little bit closer to those varieties we're working with, because that's predominantly Holass Riesling in the Balaton-Somló area. And then the Grüne Veltliner is again completely different. And even our 3 Blaufränkisches, they ripen within 2 weeks difference, you know. We start to pick the Balf, which is the most exposed, and then we have the Höllersgrund, which is on the top of the hill and more younger wines. And then we have the Riesling, which is on the complete other side of the hill and growing on pure limestone and very, very thick skin and needs much longer to ripen. So it's actually a really exciting game. It's a fair bit of traveling around. It's a fair bit of calling around. I love it. I mean, you know, you might see that where I'm coming from with all this, like having all these different regions in Hungary and managing the whole thing in Belgium and France as well in the meantime. So yes, it's a challenge, but it's a good challenge. I love to work like this. And one thing is really helpful, that every single person here, there's no, let me say, of course, there is always some economic interest as long as we don't make this whole business belly up. But at the end of the day, our interest is exactly the same. Those guys in every single winery, they pretty much think like I do. So they pick up the phone if something, you know, heads in a direction with what they know that I wouldn't be happy with. So it's kind of handy.
And is the way you make wine evolving because it's still quite a young project?
Definitely.
Yeah. Where are you? What have you learned? Where are you going? What do you want to do next?
I don't know. I don't think we wanna do more, or like, you know, that we wanna have, maybe every now and then we'll have a different label popping up, which would make sense strictly from these regions. We will see. Actually, it's a trailer alert. There'll be a red version of the Pinko coming, which won't be a red Pinko, but a new name, but from the same area, which is also, well, Kate Frankush. But it's more about to fine tune what we have, to what we see from the Schumeg. I mean, the Schumeg was our first wine in 2015, what we made, and now we have the 5th version of it. And really, I mean, it's such a cliche. Winemakers say, yeah, we every year we learn something and we get to know better, but it is like that. It's, even if I'm not sure if I know what I learned, I'm not even sure if I consciously know why I'm doing things differently. But at the end of the day, we really do get closer every year with every wine, which is just see like, okay, this really is in a direction, and some of the wines we even reach like what I ever wanted to do with these grapes. And then of course, every now and then you make mistakes. I mean, when you work in this way, like we work, you know, we don't play safe at all. We go to the edge all the way to achieve the best possible result we can get. And sometimes it tips over and then we see that mistake, and sometimes it takes years to correct it in a bottle or something, but we're happy to take that. And from that, definitely you learn something. And then, yeah, of course, you get frost, you get hail, you get disease pressure, you get whatnot, and you get animals eating your vineyard. In Tokai, there were vineyards back then stolen from people, like overnight harvested off by local troops to sell it on the black market in a vintage where there was very little grapes. I mean, it's crazy. You can meet everything, and you all learn from those experiences, I suppose, or not.
Bridget is wondering whether you would consider buying any vineyards, or are you really happy with your current arrangement? And if you did buy them, do you think that would change the way you made wine or worked? Or?
We're really happy with our current arrangement. And to me, if we would buy vineyards, it would swap completely around the way we work. I mean, suddenly we would just kick the chair out of underneath ourselves in a way. I mean, there is a half truth. Of course, the Chomlo and Schumeg wines are coming out of my father's cellar, which is kind of semi-ours. I mean, obviously, those are the two labels we are the closest involved with. And yeah, at the end of the day, if we would buy vineyard, of course, yeah, we would be more linked to it. There would be a financial pressure on us to make it work. And this is something throughout my career, I'm not coming from winemaking background. I don't even have a diploma or anything. I have a law degree. I studied in different universities in Europe, and then once I completed my master's, I traveled to South Africa to learn to make wine from youngsters like Craig Hawkins and Adi Badenhorst and stuff, you know. And when I came back, I realized that I just want to do something completely as I want to do it. I don't want to link myself to any sort of preconception in a way. And Ellie was a brilliant partner in this, because she was the person who moved me, who made this all happen in a way, you know, like it's very often you say a man is as strong as a woman next to him, and it's a shame she cannot be here now with the kids, that we cannot share these thoughts, but I think we just kind of find something really precious for ourselves, something we enjoy, something what works. And I don't think that we should change this setup, because it's good. It's unique in a way. I'm proud of it to be unique, and I don't care. I mean, very often I meet winemakers and they ask like, yeah, and do you have your vineyards? You buy grapes? You're a negociant? And I don't care, you know, it's like that sort of like noble pride when people say like, that's, you know, that can be seen in a completely different way. And I think the world as it's changing, everything is possible. I mean, you know, today we are in a completely different place, even where we were 20 years ago, I suppose. I'm talking about in terms of winemaking and grape varieties and market and stars and opportunities, and well, if I apply the same strategy to the next coming 20 years, then why not? I mean, I think it's all right.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you came from South Africa, because it's so common with sort of the Swartland producers. I mean, yeah. Adi and Craig do have vineyards, but a lot of them don't. Even still, it's something that's just accepted there, and you know, maybe as time goes on in Champagne and Burgundy, and they have to sell their vineyards to insurance companies, right. People won't own vineyards there either. So you know, it's
exactly. Yeah, I think we need to rethink how we look at land and background. The one thing you should never forget is your principles. It's your taste. What you want to see in that bottle, what you're standing for, what you get excited about, and that you really need to stick through. So Holass is a very, very densely knitted structure in this way. I mean, there's no weak chain in between, because it was only built through mutual trust. You know, there's no commercial idea behind in many ways. Of course, we do need to make a living out of it to be able to stay independent, but at the end of the day, there are no shortcuts. There are absolutely no shortcuts in this story, and we wanna stick to that. I mean, independence and your freedom is, I think, the biggest treasure you can have in life. That's pretty much a thing which is the most difficult to buy on money. You know, it's like, you can make money. I mean, it's brilliant if you have it, and I have great thoughts what I could do with money, but still, at the end of the day, it still remains, will put you in a position that it will be awfully difficult to buy freedom and independence of your money. Because they very often don't go hand in hand.
So yeah, these wines completely from the heart.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any other questions to ask Imre about the wines, about the terroir, or generally?
I'd love to hear people's thoughts on the wine as well, actually.
Yeah, good point.
People drinking the Balf at the moment, or
on the Balf. Yeah, I mean, this is a wine so a little background story. The vineyard this wine is coming from is sort of a sub part of the vineyard, of a bigger vineyard. It's called the Steiner. And the Steiner vineyard has been the most famous and expensive vineyard in the entire West Hungary and then east of Austria, that we know through taxation records from the archives. Back 200 years, that was always the most highly taxed vineyard. So that gives you kind of a hint that probably this was the vineyard which produced the best fruit, or the most stable fruit in many ways. And my connection to this vineyard, that was probably the oldest Blaufränkisch I ever tasted. So the wines were produced there from the middle of 80s, 90s, on which I kind of grew up because of my father, introduced me to do all this thing from a tender age on. I have the memory of this wine, even if it was somewhat masked by the style of winemaking but this is just such an incredibly strong vineyard, and it has a perfume, it has a transparency, it has power and lightness. What I love about wine. But I love when it's so persistent on your palate, when it keeps giving, when it's full of taste without any weight. It remains transparent, it remains light on alcohol. It's in many ways what I explained about how I love Cru Beaujolais, for example, or a really good Burgundy, or whatnot. But this wine tells you that exact story from the moment on it finished fermentation, from the moment on we pressed and it did malolactic. We never moved. I mean, this wine was, I know we said we're not going to go into geeky details, but we just pressed this wine and it spent the next 24 months in this 3,000 liter container, wooden container, in this vat, on the full lease without adding anything. And it has always been like keeping that sort of same agenda. And when I taste it now, and I would really love to see this wine like much later as well, because it evolves beautifully through. So it just keeps this sort of very fragile, beautiful, elegant structure with a nice spiciness. I believe, and not, don't get me wrong, I don't want to come across obnoxious, but this is a style of Blaufränkisch cake Frankish I want to believe in, and I want to see more on the market. And of course, there is plenty of cake Frankisches like this from friends of mine as well from the region. But I'm really proud and happy that we have this, and we are able to tell the message. We are able to put out when people learn about the Holass, and then they see the origin, Balf, the village in the Sopron region, and at the back you see it's from the Sopron region and made from cake Frankish, and they open it now or in 10 years later, whenever, they get the right message. So these are the kind of wines they make there. That's what's possible. So yeah, these are the thoughts of more specifically, of course, is the transparency, is the spiciness, is the herbaceousness of the wine. You have fruit, but not overwhelming, not as upfront as you might get in Sopron. It's not the Sopron is overwhelming, there's more upfront fruit. Here you have more of this like very nice cherry fruit, like more on the cherry pit, when you about to spit the cherry pit out, and you have this slightly caramelized taste of the cherry pit. And I love that in Blaufränkisch it comes very, very often. And most importantly, this wine tastes exactly the same like the grapes we're tasting when we pick them. And to me, as a winemaker, this is the greatest deal you can do as a winemaker. When your wine tastes the way your grapes tasted on the day we pick, because all you do as a winemaker, you take a photo. You go out to the vineyard and you it's like a painter. You think that the sun is shining beautifully now, and I take a photo of it, and it's going to be beautiful. So the moment you taste those grapes, you take a photo. You decide to pick it immediately, and let magic do its job. You know, fermentation is magic. I know nothing about it. I told you I have no professional background, so that helps me a lot, and I'm able to trust it. So for the very same reason, all I know that this fermentation has been going on in the past 300 years with the same grape variety from the same region, and been producing great results. So then you get it in your glass, and it's in your glass, and the really magical part of it that it can be in your glass, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 years later, who knows?
I think that's a good, you compare it to Cru Beaujolais, it's very much the same thing, isn't it? It's fantastic in its youth, but actually they have such great potential
Exactly.
As they age. And actually something that a lot of people don't consider with Beaujolais is actually their age potential. And it's something that people only really starting to, think about. But yeah, I can imagine this wine will be, it's incredible now, but I can see it's got so much potential,
Yes.
years down the line.
Once you get the tertiary aromas there, a bit of a sous-bois starting to crawl in underneath, it really goes into this sort of, really exciting next direction. But basically, I don't see further more oxidation coming up on this wine. I mean, when you taste it now for a young wine, some people would, if they come from a more classic background or a more made wine background, they would say like, this wine is fairly oxidized. But to me, oxidation is a very important factor in winemaking. You want to reach a level of oxidation when the wine is young, which does not affect the taste. For me, it even helps the taste. And that oxidation just kind of stops there. It doesn't matter, how much longer you keep your bottle open on the shelf if you're sitting in a restaurant, or how much longer you keep your bottle in your cellar if you're a wine collector. That oxidation just protects your wine from further oxidation. It's kind of a reverse logic, but I think it's most wine lovers are quite aware of.
Fantastic, thank you. Does that, Phil, does that answer your sort of aging question sufficiently?
Yeah, it does. I was just sort of curious. It sounds like it may be, possible to look at it over a decade or two, and that would be a really fascinating journey to do that. I think. I mean, it's great now, but really interesting to see what happens. And yeah, you've answered that, so thank you.
This is the problem, Phil. Is you have to have the restraint to keep hold of the bottles.
Just you buy
You've
lots.
still got to hide it at the back of you still got to hide it somewhere in the house, don't you, or something. Otherwise, if it sits at the front of somewhere, it's a bit.
I do under the floorboards. That's it.
Fantastic. Bridget had just a question about the reaction to Hungarian wine internationally. I mean, you travel presumably normally to promote your wines when you were at ProWine, definitely. So what is the reaction to Hungarian wine? Do people know about it? What do they think about it?
I think it's changing. I mean, the reaction to Hungarian wine for a timing, it was like, the cheap, like most Eastern European wines, it should be a cheap alternative. We know there are great wines coming out from there, but, we want to have a Merlot or Cabernet Sauvignon or Chardonnay much, much cheaper than it's coming from old world regions. And now with that sort of swap in more authentic, independent winemaking scene, more of the youngsters, well-traveled people working in I'm using the word style, international style. It's not the style they make that they copy anybody, but more like some more contemporary. I don't think there's a huge difference now anymore between a 30-year-old Hungarian winemaker or a 30-year-old French winemaker these days, or a 30-year-old South African winemaker. So that's kind of just brought Hungarian wine on the same field in many ways. And thankfully, distribution is going into that direction as well, no matter where you go. I mean, we just heard about from a distributor in Oregon. They said that, there's a restaurant. They specifically look for Eastern European wines, especially Hungarian wines. And when I seen the list, that was like everything there, like what I know, what makes sense. And in many ways, I also do believe that in this wave of authentic natural winemaking, Austria took a huge leap some 10 years before than we did. And in many ways, if you see what's happening now in Czech, in Slovakia, in Slovenia, I mean, Slovenia's even had Serbia, Romania, Hungary, is definitely the new and exciting up-and-coming region. It's, if I was a marketing manager, I would say this is the next hot shit or, whatever. But No, definitely. This is a place where you will see more new things coming out. This is a place which is definitely, I mean, if you like these wines, and I suppose we are all sitting here because we like these wines, it's capable of delivering great wines. And it is an untold story. And it's an untold story. And it's not an untold story you have to invent. Like in many ways, it's an untold story which has been there. I mean, in our region, in this Carpathian Basin, if you go to archaeological findings, the grape seed predates the Romans. You know, when you go to France, the grape seed was transported by the Romans. The Romans planted the grapes around in France, in Germany. And it's well, it's not coming from me. It's coming from my previous boss, who kept telling at every big get together. And I was sitting Roberto Conterno there from Barolo, or Nadi Foucault from Clos Rougeard, and Jeremy Sess from Dujac, and he stood up at the table and he told them, "It's all very nice, guys, but my wine culture is much, much older than yours." So that's the next new thing from Eastern Europe, which is one of the most original stories of the wine world. After Georgia, of course. Nobody can beat Georgia.
Brilliant. Okay, Maria. I mean, I think that's it's quite a nice place to wrap things up, really. If people haven't got any more questions, so it's been absolutely great to sort of hear a little bit more about where you came from and the project, and just learn a little bit more about the region. For anyone who hasn't had a look at Jamie's article, Blurred Borders, on the website, that gives a little bit of an overview again about the crossover between these wine regions and the history and things like that as well. So that's if you want to read more, there's a little bit more on there. And I'm sure will be in touch tomorrow with just a little bit more information about the wines, because all the other wines, the whites and the other Keck Frankos, are all on the site as well, if you're excited to explore a little bit more. So yeah, thank you very much for joining, everyone. Again, thank you so much, Imre. It's been great. And Ellie for popping in. And yeah, hope to see you guys on another one soon. Thank you.